I paid $500,000 for my daughter's wedding. Then I watched as she walked down the aisle with another man she introduced as her father. That moment broke me, not because I couldn't handle the pain, but because in that instant I realized exactly what I needed to do. My name is Martin Callahan. I built my life from nothing, started as a janitor, and worked my way up to owning my own renovation business. Nothing fancy, just honest work that put food on the table for my daughter Julia after her mother died in a car crash. For 15 years, I raised Julia alone. Every school play, every graduation, every fever at 3 a.m., it was just us. I'd whisper to her, "Your mom would be so proud." And she'd smile that smile that made every sacrifice worth it. So, when the wedding invitation arrived in my mailbox last spring, I felt that familiar pride swell in my chest. My little girl was getting married at the Lakeside Pavilion, one of those places where the chandeliers probably cost more than my truck. But something felt off. The envelope was addressed to Mr. Martin Callahan, not Dad. Inside, the card was stiff and formal, like I was some distant relative she felt obligated to invite. I called Julia immediately. "Honey, I got the invitation. It looks beautiful." "Oh, great," she said, her voice oddly flat. "Listen, I'm heading into a meeting. We'll catch up later, okay?" She hung up before I could respond. That night, I noticed something else about the invitation. The wedding was only 3 months away, but Julia had been engaged to Brandon for nearly a year. Why was I just hearing about the date now? I didn't know it then. But that invitation wasn't the beginning of my daughter's wedding journey. It was the first step toward the moment I'd stand up in front of 350 guests and teach my daughter the most painful lesson of her life. And what happened next would change everything between us forever. 2 weeks after receiving the invitation, my phone rang at 11:30 p.m. Julia was crying. "Dad, I'm so sorry to call this late," she sobbed. "The venue needs the final deposit by tomorrow or we lose our date. Brandon's parents were supposed to help, but they're backing out. It's $50,000 we don't have." My heart sank. That was more than 4 months of my income. "How much is the total for this wedding, sweetheart?" I asked quietly. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Around $500,000. I nearly dropped the phone. That was more than my house was worth. "I know it's crazy," she rushed on, "but Brandon's family has connections. His dad's business partners will be there. This could change our lives, Dad." I closed my eyes, thinking of the small college fund I'd scraped together for her, the overtime shifts I'd worked when she needed braces. "Don't worry about it," I heard myself say. "I'll take care of it." The next morning, I called my business partner. "Mike, I need to sell 40% of my shares." "What? Martin, you've built this company from nothing. Why would you—" "It's for Julia's wedding." Mike went quiet. "That's a lot of money to spend on one day." "It's not just a day," I said. "It's her future." What I didn't tell him was that after selling those shares, I still needed more. So I took out a loan, using my house as collateral. The house where Julia took her first steps, where I taught her to read at the kitchen table. Later that week, the wedding planner called me directly. "Mr. Callahan, I wanted to confirm the payments for the floral arrangements, $30,000, the photographer, $25,000, and the catering, $75,000. Each number hit like a physical blow. But I said yes to everything. Have you ever sacrificed something important for someone you love, only to wonder if they even noticed? As I signed the loan papers, I remember Julia at 5 years old, holding up a crayon drawing, "This is you and me, Daddy, forever." I never once thought to ask, at what point does sacrifice become self-destruction? I was about to find out. Over the next 2 months, Julia canceled our planning meetings 3 times. "Sorry, Dad. Work is crazy. Brandon's mom wants to look at flowers instead. The wedding planner says we've got it covered." I told myself it was normal. Brides get busy. But then came the day I decided to surprise her at work. I brought her favorite lunch, turkey club, no tomato, extra pickles, the same sandwich I'd made for her school lunches for years. When I arrived at her office building, my chest swelled with pride. My little girl, working in a glass tower downtown. I spotted her in the lobby, talking with colleagues. Her hair was different, sleeker, more polished. Her clothes looked expensive. "Julia," I called out, waving the lunch bag. Her smile froze. Something flashed across her face. Was it embarrassment? "Oh, hi. I didn't expect you," she said, her voice higher than normal. A man in an expensive suit looked at me curiously. "Is this your father?" Julia hesitated for just a second too long. "This is Martin. He helped raise me." Helped raise her? I wasn't some weekend babysitter. I was her father, the only parent she'd had since she was 10. The man nodded politely and walked away. Julia quickly took the lunch bag. "Thanks for this. I should get back upstairs." "I thought maybe we could eat together," I said. "I have meetings all afternoon. I'll call you later, okay?" She was gone before I could answer. On the drive home, her words echoed in my head. He helped raise me. That night, I overheard something that chilled me to the bone. I called Julia about the venue payment, but she didn't pick up. Instead, I heard her voicemail kick in as someone spoke in the background. "Is that your dad again? I thought you told my parents he wasn't in the picture anymore." It was Brandon's voice. Julia's response was too quiet to hear, but the damage was done. My daughter was erasing me from her story. The wedding day arrived bright and clear. I woke at 5 a.m., too nervous to sleep. I'd pressed my best gray suit the night before and polished my shoes until I could see my reflection. By 7 a.m., I was at the lakeside pavilion. The morning sun sparkled off the water as staff rushed around setting up chairs and arranging flowers that cost more than my monthly mortgage. "Sir, could you help move these boxes to the back?" A young man in a venue uniform approached me. "The reception staff aren't allowed in this area yet." Before I could explain who I was, I spotted Julia across the room in her white robe, hair half done, surrounded by bridesmaids. Our eyes met. The look on her face wasn't joy. It was panic. She rushed over, pulling me aside behind a large floral arrangement. "Dad," she whispered through gritted teeth, "what are you doing here so early?" "I wanted to help, sweetheart. It's your big day." "Please go outside," she said, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "You're not supposed to be in here yet." But I thought, "Please," she cut me off. "Don't make a scene. Brandon's family is here. They don't know much about your background." My background? I'd built a successful business from nothing. What was she ashamed of? As we stood there, a woman in an expensive dress approached. "Julia, darling, who's this?" Julia's hand tightened on my arm. She forced a smile and said, "Oh, he's just one of the event staff helping with setup." The woman nodded politely and walked away. Julia turned back to me, her eyes pleading. "Just stay out of sight until the ceremony, okay?" Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people? like you're a ghost watching your own life from the outside? As I walked out, a waiter handed me a tray, assuming I worked there. I took it without a word. The ceremony was set to begin at 2 p.m. I found my seat, last row, far corner, behind a column. Not where the father of the bride typically sits. I watched guests arrive in designer clothes, air-kissing, and laughing. Brandon's family occupied the entire front row. His parents, grandparents, siblings. The music changed. Everyone stood. The officiant's voice rang out. Please welcome the bride, escorted by family friend James Morrison. My heart stopped. Down the aisle came my daughter, radiant in her gown, arm in arm with a tall, silver-haired man I'd never seen before. He was around 60, wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than my car. This stranger was walking my daughter down the aisle. The man who taught her to ride a bike, who checked under her bed for monsters, who worked double shifts to pay for her college. That man was sitting in the back row, watching another man take his place. I couldn't breathe. The ceremony continued around me, but all I heard was a dull roar in my ears. When they reached the altar, this James kissed Julia's cheek and placed her hand in Brandon's, the gesture a father makes when giving away his daughter. I sat frozen as they exchanged vows, as they kissed, as everyone cheered. During the reception, I approached their table, gift in hand. Julia introduced me to Brandon's parents with a quick, "This is Martin, a family friend." Then she turned to the silver-haired man beside her. "And this is James Morrison. He's been like a father to me for years." James smiled warmly, completely unaware of who I really was. "Lovely to meet you. Any friend of Julia's is a friend of ours." I later overheard a conversation that explained everything. James was Brandon's father's business partner. Old money, country club membership, the kind of connections Julia thought she needed. "It was so generous of James to step in," Brandon's mother was saying to another guest. "Julia's situation is unfortunate. No real family to speak of." No real family? I'd given her everything. As I stood there, invisible again, the wedding planner tapped my shoulder. "Mr. Callahan, the final venue payment is due by 9 p.m. tonight. $340,000. I nodded numbly. That's when I knew what I had to do. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because sometimes the only way to be heard is to stop speaking altogether. And sometimes the quietest revenge is simply telling the truth. Drop a comment if you've ever been betrayed by someone you sacrificed everything for. What did you do? At the reception, I found my name card at table 18, the farthest table from the wedding party, tucked behind a large column. I was seated with distant cousins who kept asking how I knew the bride. "I'm her father," I said each time. They'd look confused. "But wasn't that gentleman who walked her down the aisle?" I'd smile and change the subject. The dinner was served, $200 per plate for food I barely tasted. Champagne flowed as Brandon's father stood to make a toast. "To the beautiful couple," he raised his glass, "and to both sets of parents who raised these exceptional young people." He nodded toward Brandon's mother, then to James and his wife. Not once did his eyes move in my direction. I watched Julia laugh, her head thrown back, looking more carefree than I had seen her in years. She fit perfectly in this world of wealth and privilege, a world I could never give her. At 8:45 p.m., the wedding planner approached my table, looking flustered. She handed me an envelope. I'm so sorry to bother you, Mr. Callahan, but the venue manager needs the final payment processed before 9 p.m. I opened the envelope. The final bill, $340,000, due in 15 minutes. As I stared at the numbers, a conversation from the next table drifted over. "Brandon's done well for himself," a man was saying. "Julia's quite beautiful, despite her unfortunate background." "I heard she grew up in some suburb," a woman replied. "Father was a handyman or plumber or something." "Well, she's certainly moved up in the world. That's what matters." They laughed, that practiced hollow laugh of people who've never worried about making rent. I looked down at my calloused hands, hands that had built houses, fixed cars, and wiped away my daughter's tears, hands that had signed away my life savings and future security to pay for this wedding, hands that were now holding a bill for $340,000 that would clean out the last of my accounts. In that moment, something inside me broke. Not my heart, that had been breaking slowly for months. No, what broke was my silence. Have you ever reached that point where you realize you've been used by someone you love? That moment when all the little betrayals suddenly form a clear pattern? I stood up, bill in hand, and walked toward the exit. I needed air. I needed to think. I had 15 minutes to decide what kind of father I was going to be. The garden behind the lakeside pavilion was empty. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees as music and laughter spilled from inside. I sat on a stone bench, staring at the water. My phone buzzed. A notification from my bank. Low balance alert. Of course, I'd already transferred most of my savings to cover the previous wedding expenses. This final payment would drain everything else. I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me. Julia at 7, sitting on my shoulders at the county fair, sticky cotton candy hands in my hair. Julia at 12, crying over her mother's photo on the anniversary of the accident, me holding her until she fell asleep. Julia at 18, opening her college acceptance letter, jumping into my arms, shouting, "We did it, Dad, we did it." We, always we, until it wasn't, until I became someone to hide, to be ashamed of, a secret to keep from her new family. I pulled out my wallet and found the photo I always carried. Julia on her first day of kindergarten, missing front teeth, holding my hand so tight. What would that little girl think of the woman who pretended her father didn't exist? What would my late wife think of how our daughter had turned out? The wedding planner appeared at the garden entrance. "Mr. Callahan, the venue manager is asking about the payment." I stood up, straightening my jacket. "Tell him I'll be right there." As I walked back toward the reception, I made my decision, not out of anger or revenge, but out of something deeper, the need for truth. I wouldn't yell, I wouldn't cause a scene, I would simply speak my truth once and then walk away. I approached the wedding planner. "Is there a time scheduled for toasts?" She checked her clipboard. "Yes, in about 20 minutes. The best man will go first, then the maid of honor." "I'd like 5 minutes at the microphone after them." She looked surprised. "You're not on the list of speakers." "I'm the father of the bride," I said quietly, "and I'm paying for this wedding." She hesitated, then nodded. "I'll add you to the list." As I walked back into the reception hall, I felt strangely calm. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones we never wanted to teach. Would you have stayed silent, or would you have spoken up? Let me know in the comments. The best man finished his speech with a joke about Brandon's college days that had the crowd roaring with laughter. The maid of honor followed with a tearful tribute to her friendship with Julia. Then the MC tapped the microphone. And now, a few words from the bride's father. A confused murmur spread through the room. Guests looked around, puzzled. Julia's head snapped up, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. I stood from my seat at table 18 and walked slowly toward the front. With each step, I felt the weight of 15 years of single fatherhood, of empty bank accounts, of being erased from my daughter's story. Julia's face drained of color. Brandon placed a protective hand on her arm, whispering something in her ear. His father straightened in his chair, eyes narrowing. The room fell silent as I reached the microphone. 350 pairs of eyes watched me, some curious, some confused, some already suspicious. I cleared my throat. "Good evening, everyone." My voice came out steady, surprising even me. For those who don't know me, I'm Martin Callahan, Julia's father. More whispers. Someone at the head table, Brandon's mother, I think, gasped audibly. I've watched my daughter grow from a little girl who couldn't sleep without her teddy bear into the beautiful woman you see today. I've been proud of every step she's taken. I paused, looking directly at Julia. Even the steps that took her away from me. Julia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. James Morrison, the man who'd walked her down the aisle, looked between us, confusion dawning on his face. "I know tonight's celebration has been extraordinary," I continued, smiling faintly. "The flowers, the catering, the music, the venue, it's all breathtaking, and it should be, considering what it cost." A nervous laugh rippled through the audience. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the final bill from the venue. You see, I've been thinking about costs lately, not just financial ones, though those have been substantial. I unfolded the paper slowly, letting the moment stretch. But also about what we sacrifice for the people we love and what happens when that love isn't enough anymore. The room had gone completely still. Even the servers had stopped moving. Julia's eyes were wide now, pleading silently, but I was done with silence. "This wedding," I said, holding up the bill, "cost just over $500,000. Gasps echoed through the hall. Even in this wealthy crowd, that number raised eyebrows. "I know that because I paid for it. Every flower arrangement, every crystal glass, every bite of that 5-course meal you just enjoyed." I looked directly at Brandon's father. "I sold 40% of my business, a business I built from nothing over 20 years. I took out a loan against my house, the house where I raised Julia alone after her mother died." Julia was shaking her head slightly, her knuckles white around her champagne flute. "I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because that's what fathers do. We sacrifice for our children's happiness." I turned to face the entire room. But tonight, I learned something important. I learned that I'm not actually the father of the bride, at least not according to this wedding. I gestured toward James Morrison. "According to today's ceremony, that honor belongs to Mr. Morrison here, a man who, as far as I know, met my daughter 6 months ago." James looked down, uncomfortable. To his credit, he seemed genuinely shocked. "I was introduced tonight as event staff." I was seated at the back of the room behind a column. I watched another man walk my daughter down the aisle. My voice cracked slightly, but I pushed on. "And I heard, just an hour ago, someone describe me as a plumber or handyman or something, from Julia's unfortunate background. Brandon's mother flushed deep red. The truth is, I'm not a plumber. I own, or owned, before I sold nearly half of it, a renovation company that employs 32 people. I put my daughter through college without a penny of debt. I taught her to ride a bike, to drive a car, to stand up for herself. I looked at Julia, whose eyes were now filled with tears. But somewhere along the way, I became something to be ashamed of, something to hide from your new family, your new life. I held up the venue bill again. This final payment of $340,000 is due tonight. It would clean out what's left of my savings. The wedding planner stepped forward nervously, but I waved her off. I've realized something. Love without respect is just servitude, and every servant knows when their work is done. I turned to Brandon, whose face had gone pale. So as of tonight, I'll be transferring the remaining balance of the wedding bills to you, Brandon. The venue, the catering, the photography, everything not yet paid will be billed directly to you. Gasps echoed through the hall again. Someone dropped a glass. I love you, Julia. I always will. But I can't keep paying, financially or emotionally, for your silence. I folded the bill and placed it on the head table. Congratulations on your marriage. I hope it brings you everything you think you need. Then I placed the microphone down, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the exit. Behind me, chaos erupted, but I didn't look back. Hit that like button if you think Martin did the right thing. Would you have done the same? Tell me in the comments. I made it halfway to the parking lot when I heard footsteps running behind me. Martin! Wait! It was Brandon, face flushed, bow tie askew. He caught up to me, breathing hard. You can't just leave like this, he said. You can't dump a $340,000 bill on us and walk away. That's extortion. I turned to face him calmly. It's not extortion, Brandon. It's a consequence. My father's lawyers will fight this, he threatened, lowering his voice. You can't destroy my wife's wedding over some petty grudge. It's not a grudge, I replied. It's a lesson, one I should have taught Julia long ago. Brandon's father appeared behind him, red-faced and furious. What kind of father humiliates his daughter on her wedding day, in front of our friends and business associates? I looked at him steadily. What kind of father gets erased from his daughter's life because he doesn't fit the image she's trying to project? The venue manager approached, looking nervous. Gentlemen, about the final payment. Brandon's father waved him away. This is outrageous. We never agreed to pay for this wedding. Neither did I said quietly, but I did it anyway, because that's what love looks like. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my checkbook. For a moment, Brandon's face relaxed. He thought I was going to pay after all. Instead, I took the bill from his hand, looked at the total one last time, and tore my checkbook in half. Some bills, I said, handing the torn pieces back to him. Come due in ways you never see coming. I walked to my car without looking back. As I drove away, I saw Julia in my rearview mirror, standing at the entrance in her white dress, mascara streaking down her face. It should have broken my heart. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. My phone started ringing immediately. Julia, Brandon, the wedding planner. I turned it off. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of whiskey, watching the stars. The same stars that had witnessed every bedtime story, every Christmas morning, every proud moment between a father and daughter. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what Julia needed. I was thinking about what I deserved, and it wasn't this. By morning, the story had exploded online. Someone at the wedding had recorded my speech and posted it with the caption, "Father of bride reveals he paid 500 KL for wedding where daughter pretended he didn't exist." My phone had 47 missed calls and hundreds of text messages. I ignored them all and went to work. 3 days later, the local news picked up the story, then national outlets. "Wedding gone wrong, father's revenge," read one headline. "Class warfare at the altar," read another. Some called me cruel, others called it justice. The internet was divided with hashtags trending on both sides. I received emails from strangers around the world, some sharing similar stories of family betrayal, others offering support, a few condemning me for publicly shaming my daughter. A week after the wedding, Julia showed up at my door. Her eyes were swollen, her designer clothes wrinkled. "How could you do this to me?" she cried the moment I opened the door. "You've ruined everything. The honeymoon's canceled. Brandon's parents won't speak to us. His father's business partners are backing out of deals." I let her vent without interruption. "The venue is threatening to sue us," she continued. "We can't afford that payment, Dad. You knew we couldn't." "Yes," I said quietly, "just like I couldn't really afford it either, but I was willing to sacrifice everything for your happiness." "Then why did you do this?" she demanded. "Because sacrifice without respect isn't love, Julia. It's abuse, and I was letting you abuse my love." She collapsed onto my porch steps, sobbing. "I just wanted to fit in with them. I wanted to be good enough." "You were always good enough," I said. "Our life was always good enough." She looked up at me, mascara streaking down her face again. "Fix this, Dad. Please, pay the bill. Tell everyone it was a misunderstanding." I shook my head slowly. "I can't fix this, Julia, and more importantly, I won't." "So what happens now?" she whispered. "Now you learn what it costs to erase someone who loves you." I gently closed the door. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you love for your own self-respect? Share your experience below. Julia returned the next day. This time, she brought Brandon. I invited them in, offered coffee. Brandon declined. Julia accepted, then stared into the mug without drinking. "We need to talk about what happened," Brandon began, his voice stiff and formal. "My family's reputation has been damaged. People are calling my father elitist. Some of his clients are reconsidering their contracts." "That sounds difficult," I said calmly. Brandon's jaw tightened. "This isn't a joke, Martin. You humiliated us in front of everyone who matters in our world." "Your world," I corrected, "not mine." Julia set down her mug with a sharp click. "Dad, please, we're trying to fix this." "What exactly are you trying to fix, Julia? The fact that I told the truth? Or the fact that people heard it?" She flinched. "You didn't have to do it that way. You could have talked to me privately." "When?" I asked. "When you were introducing me as staff? When you were letting another man walk you down the aisle? When exactly were you planning to listen?" Brandon leaned forward. "Look, we understand you're hurt, but what you did was—" "What I did," I interrupted, "was pay for a wedding where I wasn't welcome. What I did was sacrifice my financial security for a daughter who was ashamed of me. What I did was finally stand up for myself." Julia started crying again. "I wasn't ashamed of you. I was just trying to fit in." By erasing me, I said quietly, by pretending I didn't exist. Brandon's family has expectations, she pleaded. They wouldn't understand someone like me, I finished for her. A working man who built something from nothing, who raised his daughter alone after his wife died. You're right. How embarrassing for you. Brandon stood up. This isn't productive. We came to ask you to pay the venue bill and issue a public statement saying it was all a misunderstanding. I looked at him for a long moment. No. Dad, please, Julia begged. We can't afford it. Brandon's parents are refusing to help. Then I guess you'll have to figure it out, I said, just like I figured out how to raise you alone, how to pay for your college, how to build a life for us. Is this punishment? She asked, voice breaking. Are you trying to hurt me? I shook my head. This isn't punishment, Julia. It's a boundary. For the first time in your life, I'm saying no to you, and for the first time in my life, I'm saying yes to myself. I stood up, signaling the end of our conversation. I love you. I always will. But love without respect isn't love at all. As they left, Julia turned back. Was it worth it? Losing your daughter to make a point? I lost you long before the wedding, Julia, I said gently. I just finally admitted it. 2 weeks after the confrontation, something strange happened. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Is this Martin Callahan? A woman's voice asked. Yes, it is. My name is Rebecca Torres. I own Torres Development Group. I saw the video of your wedding speech. I sighed. Look, I'm not interested in interviews or... I'm not calling about that, she interrupted. I'm calling because I need a renovation company I can trust, someone with integrity, someone who stands up for what's right. I was speechless. My company is building a new community center. It's a $2 million project. Would you be interested in bidding? That call was just the beginning. Over the next month, my small renovation business received more inquiries than we'd had in the previous year. People sought us out specifically because of my story. They used words like honest, principled, and real. Mike, my business partner, was stunned. Martin, we're going to need to hire more crews. We can't keep up with the demand. Meanwhile, I heard through mutual friends that Brandon's family was facing their own consequences. Several clients had pulled their investments from Brandon's father's firm. The country club was buzzing with gossip. Their carefully cultivated image of perfection had cracked. The financial strain hit Brandon and Julia hard. Without his parents' support, they couldn't afford the lifestyle they'd planned. The honeymoon to Bali was canceled. The luxury apartment fell through. The venue was threatening legal action over the unpaid bill. I didn't take pleasure in their struggles, but I recognized the lesson in them. One afternoon, I received a call from a local community college. They were starting a scholarship fund for single parents and wanted to name it after me. Would I be willing to make the first donation? I thought about all the nights I'd sat at the kitchen table, bills spread out, figuring out how to make ends meet while raising Julia alone. Yes, I said, I'd be honored. Sometimes losing everything you thought mattered opens the door to everything that actually does. If this story resonates with you, hit that subscribe button. Have you ever lost something only to gain something better? Share below. 6 months after the wedding, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Julia's handwriting on the envelope. I held it for a long time before placing it unopened on my mantel, next to the last photo taken of Julia and her mother together. That evening, I drove past the lakeside pavilion. Another wedding was underway. White chairs on the lawn, fairy lights in the trees, a couple standing beneath the same arch where Julia and Brandon had exchanged vows. I pulled over and watched from a distance. The father of the bride was dancing with his daughter, both laughing. The simple joy of that moment hit me harder than I expected. A year ago, that sight would have crushed me with grief for what I'd lost. Now, I felt something different. Not happiness exactly, but peace. The kind that comes from finally setting down a weight you've carried too long. I drove home and looked at Julia's unopened letter. Part of me wanted to read it, to know if she was apologizing, explaining, or blaming me further. Another part knew it didn't matter. Some wounds aren't meant to be reopened. Some words come too late. I left the letter where it was and went to bed. The next morning, I received a call from Mike. "Martin, we just landed the Henderson contract. That puts us at double our revenue from last year." "That's great news," I said, genuinely pleased. "You know what's funny?" Mike continued. "Remember when you sold those shares to pay for Julia's wedding? If you'd kept them, they'd be worth 3 times as much now with how we're growing." I laughed. Life has a strange way of working out. After hanging up, I looked again at Julia's letter. I still wasn't ready to open it. Maybe someday, maybe never. What I knew for certain was that I no longer needed her words to feel complete. The father who would have done anything for his daughter's approval was gone. In his place stood a man who had finally learned to value himself. 1 year to the day after Julia's wedding, I received another envelope. This one contained divorce papers. Julia and Brandon's marriage had lasted exactly 12 months. Along with the legal documents was a second letter from Julia. Unlike the first, I opened this one. "Dad," it began, "Brandon and I are getting divorced. His family never recovered from the wedding scandal. They blame me for bringing you and your dramatic tendencies into their lives. The irony isn't lost on me. I've lost my job, I've lost my marriage, I've lost the life I thought I wanted, and I've lost you, the only person who ever truly loved me for who I am, not who I pretended to be. I don't expect forgiveness, I don't deserve it, but I need to start over, and I don't know how. Can we talk?" She included her new phone number and address. A small apartment across town. Nothing like the luxury condo she'd planned with Brandon. I sat with that letter for days, turning over the question in my mind. Could I let Julia back into my life? Should I? The easy answer would be no. She'd hurt me deeply. She'd rejected me, erased me, used me. But parenting isn't about easy answers. I remembered something my late wife used to say. Love isn't about keeping score. It's about keeping faith. I'd kept faith with Julia for 28 years, through midnight fevers and teenage rebellion, through college applications and career choices, through her rejection and my heartbreak. Could I keep faith now, when she needed me most, when she had nothing left to offer but her genuine self? I picked up my phone and dialed her number. "Julia, it's Dad." Her breath caught. "You called?" "Yes," I said simply. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Then don't say anything," I replied. "Just listen. I'm coming over. We'll talk. We'll start there." Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't walking away forever. Sometimes it's being strong enough to open the door again, but on your terms. Because true power isn't found in rejection. It's found in the choice to love anyway. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to hear more stories of betrayal, forgiveness, and the complicated journey of family relationships. What would you have done in Martin's shoes? Let me know in the comments below.